everyone, it's Abby with the Bead Place and beadplace.net, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how to make a ring that's inspired by knitted pattern textures and Celtic knot designs. So I've used copper to create this ring, and I think it looks like knit stitches or Celtic knots, or maybe a little bit of both. So if you'd like to see how to make this ring, stay tuned. Before we get started, I just want to remind you to give this video a big thumbs up. It really helps our channel out. Make sure to hit that subscribe button because we put out new videos all the time. And if you have any questions, leave a comment down below. Make sure to share this video with your friends if you have friends that enjoy knitting or jewelry making, or if you just want to spread the love a little bit. So also just a reminder, all the materials that we're using today can be found at beadplace.net, and there's a kit for this project that's linked down below. If you want to check out our Patreon page, there's a link again down below. It's just a fun way to support our channel with sneak peeks and perks, and there's a private Facebook group as well. Today we're going to be using 20 gauge wire. Now I have annealed this wire, which means I have torched it in a butane microtorch to make it softer. It's not entirely necessary to use annealed softened wire, but it just makes life so much easier. The next thing that we're going to be using is a steel ring mandrel. You can use a plastic ring mandrel if that's all you have. You can use a wooden dowel. You can use a fingernail polish jar, whatever you have that's about the size of the ring that you want to make. We're also going to be using a polish pad. This is a micro buffing pad. This is going to allow us to shine up our ring when we're done with it and to buff out any scratches that we may put in it with our tools. Speaking of tools, we're going to be using 2 chain nose pliers here. The reason why we're using 2 is because I find it is a lot better and a lot easier to grab with 2 chain nose pliers rather than doing any grabbing with our round nose pliers. So we also have a round nose pliers that we're just going to use once in this project at the very beginning in order to start our first curve. The other tool that we're going to be using is a flush cutter. You can use any wire cutter that gives you a flush cut. Now on to the project. We're going to be starting with 2 12-inch lengths of 20 gauge wire. The first thing we're going to do is hold the wire together as one, and we're going to find the middle of the wire, so that's the 6-inch mark. We're going to be using our round nose pliers. We're going to hold right at that 6-inch mark, and then we're going to start a gradual bend. So we're bending down, and we're going to just kind of form to about the middle of the round nose pliers, like that. So then what we're going to do is separate our wires. So we're going to be interlocking these loops by kind of weaving them together. So I'm going to take the loop that's in this hand here. This is my right hand. I'm going to place the ends of that right loop through my left loop. And then I'm going to take the ends from my left loop and put them through my right loop. And so when I pull this together, it creates a knot. Next, what we're going to be doing is tightening this knot. So pull on the ends so that the knot gets really small. So I like to pull it with my fingers, but if you need a little bit of help, you can use your chain nose pliers. So now that my knot is the size that I want it, what I'm going to do is separate my wires. So I'm going to hold my knot in place with one hand, and with my other hand, I'm going to pull the wires out to the side. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And I'm going to give it a gentle pull just to kind of set everything in place. Next, what we'll be doing is tying square knots on each side. So the tricky part is to figure out which side of the wire goes on top and which side goes on bottom. So I've done a few of these rings and it's still kind of difficult for me to think about what I'm doing each time. But essentially what we're going to be doing is taking one side of the wire and crossing it over and under the other side of the wire. So see how this wire at the bottom here is coming on top of this loop here? So here's the loop. Here's the wire coming on top of it. I know that that wire has to come on top for my knot. So I'm crossing this wire over the top of the other wire, and then I'm going to bring it underneath, and I've created a knot. So now what we're going to do is tighten our knot. So this is the tricky part because we have to make sure that we don't get many kinks in the wire, and we have to make sure that as we tighten this, it forms uniformly and centered next to that knot that we've already created. Now, if you don't have the hand strength to pull this like I do at this point, what you can do is bring in your 2 chain nose pliers to help you. Now, we want to make sure that we're only grabbing the tail end of the wire, not anywhere along the base of the wire, because that's the pretty wire that we want to show. Chances are we're going to cut these tail ends off. So only grab the tail end so you can start to kind of pull with those pliers, and that will really tighten your knot. So now we're going to turn this around and do the same thing on the other side. So this wire here is the wire that's coming on top now. This is my original knot, closest to the bottom of the screen. This is my wire that's coming on top. So I know that's the wire that needs to go on top when I do this next knot. So it needs to go over the top and then underneath and through the loop. Now, as we work, the wire will get harder and harder. We're work hardening the wire. So you'll notice that as we do these knots, it'll get more and more difficult for you to tighten them. And that's okay. That's why we have those pliers there, for us to really get them tight. So I've tightened with my hands. I could probably try to tighten it a little bit more with my hands, but why? I'm just gonna go in with my pliers and make it, whoa, I'm gonna make it a little bit easier on myself so I don't wear out my fingers. So again, I pull that tight. And now when you go a little bit closer in, you can see that I have my uniform square knots that are all facing in the right direction. So now what we're going to do is bring the wires back out. You'll notice that we're working outwards. So we're going to bring the wires back out and repeat those steps again. So on this side, I'm noticing that this wire is coming on top of the previous loop. So that's the one that's going to come on top and then go underneath and out the other side. So as I tie these knots, each one gets smaller and smaller. And I think that that is what creates a nice uniform looking ring. So it'll taper down smaller towards your ring band. So see that my center knot is right here, and this last knot that I just tied is much smaller than the center one. So it kind of tapers down almost like an elongated diamond shape. So I'm going to turn it around and do the same thing on the other side. So as you can see, this wire on this side is the wire that's on top of that loop. So I know that that's the wire that's going to come on top of my knot underneath and then out the other side. And so again, I'm going to pull this wire tight and really give it some muscle. And if you need to, you can go in with those pliers. So I'm going to go in with my pliers on this one. It's just not quite as tight as I want it to be. And I'm just going to pull. Now you can keep knotting until your heart's content. You can see on the ring that I'm wearing, I did my center knot. I did 2 more of our square knots or partial square knots on either side. On this one, I've made my knots or my loops a little bit smaller, so I'm going to keep knotting. I'm going to do one more knot on either side, and then I'll come back and show you how to finish it off into a ring. Now what we're going to do is get rid of one wire on each side. So how we're going to do that is we are going to cross them over. So my top one's going to the bottom, my bottom one's going to the top, and I'm going to do that on both sides. Try to keep them flat. And then what I want you to do is figure out which one of the wires on each side, this side versus this side, which one of the wires on each side is the straightest and the most kink-free. Mine are about the same, but if you've got one that's a little crazy, that's the one you're going to choose to be your coiling wire. So basically what we're going to be doing is we are going to coil one of these wires around the other wire and then cut it off. So what I'm going to do is grab my chain nose pliers. I'm going to take one of my wires, the wire that you want to stay on, and I am going to grab right at the crossover of these wires here. I'll try to get it repositioned so you guys can see. Grab right at the crossover, and I'm going to bend it into a right angle. So you can see I have the bent wire coming straight out of my ring. I'm going to flip it around so you can see the bend that I've put in it a little bit better. Now what I'm going to do is take the wire coming out of that side, the one that it's crossing over, and I'm going to coil that uniformly a couple of times around the straight wire. So I'm going to bring it around like that, and I'm going to continue coiling it around. Try to get this as tight as you can. Now if you need to use the pliers to help you, that's okay too. So once it's wrapped around twice, I'm going to take my flush cutter in and I'm going to trim very closely. So if need be, you can go in with your chain nose pliers and tuck the tail end down. You can even go in with a file if you need to. But in most cases, I can just get it tucked down enough that it won't cause any issues. So then you can see we have terminated one of the wires. And then we've got this long wire that we're going to continue on as the ring band. So we're going to do the same thing on the other side. I won't bore you with the details twice, but I'll come back and show you what it looks like when I'm done. So now we're going to turn it into a ring. With this fine gauge wire, I generally don't use a nylon hammer or a nylon jaw pliers in order to straighten out my wire. I like to use just my hands to straighten it out because I can. But if you have a nylon jaw pliers, or if you need to use a nylon hammer to straighten it out as we go, you can certainly do that. Now, as I work the wire like this, what's happening is the wire is getting harder. So I'm work hardening the wire so that it's going to be stiffer. It's going to be a more durable ring. While I'm doing this, I could also be using my polish pad to shine up the center of my wire. And it also removes any scratches from my tools as I worked. You see how my wire's getting shinier and shinier as I work? And it just makes it a little bit smoother. So this is an important step when we're working with fine gauge wire like this, so that we have a nice durable ring when we're done with it. So this side I did actually grab with my pliers a couple of times. And you can see as I work with the buffing pad, I'm buffing some of those scratches and dents out. So I'm just going to work harden it to my liking. You can always continue to harden it after the fact in a tumbler or with a nylon hammer. but it's just a little easier to work harden it with your fingers. Then you get more uniform wraps as you go after the fact. So I think it's about hard enough that I'll be happy working with it. It's nice and shiny now compared to what I haven't polished. So now what I'm going to do is take my ring mandrel. I'm going to find the size of the ring that I want to make, and I'm going to put my ring right around that size. I'm going to bend the wires around the top of the mandrel, and then they're going to come down and cross over on the other side as well. So we want to make sure that you really flatten your design out and shape it to your liking, because we're about at the point of no return here. So I just like to kind of manhandle it with my thumbs. Again, I don't like to use a hammer with this fine gauge wire because A, it doesn't need it, and B, if you hit too hard over any of these overlaps, you could end up breaking the wire. It also could mash our pretty coils that we've done. So I just like to use my thumbs. If there's a spot where I know it needs a little bit of help, I sometimes like to take the back of my pliers in and just push it down, just to make things a bit more even. Oh, also I didn't tell you this, but pick which side is prettiest, so either the front or the back. I just went for it, but you can make a better choice than I did. So now that these wires are overlapped, what we're going to do is take the ring off of the mandrel, and I'm going to terminate each of these wires right on the ends of the coils that we just did before. So I'm going to straighten out one of the wires. I'm going to grab my chain nose pliers. I'm going to make sure that I am grabbing both wires with my chain nose pliers right where I want to start my coil. With this, I'm going to leave a little bit of space between these coils. You could coil exactly next to the original coil and kind of make it look like you're continuing your coil into the other one, but I'm just going to make it a little bit different here. So I'm going to bend this wire straight over to the side. Whoops, I'm slipping. I'm going to bend this wire straight over to the side so that it's perpendicular to the wire that's going around our ring band. Now I'm going to move the other wire a bit out of the way so I have room to work, and then I'm also going to cut this wire down a little bit shorter so that it's easier for me to pass it through the ring band. So I'm going to cut it about in half. Make sure you're leaving enough room for you to have those nice coils though. So I'm going to then grab, well, I'm going to turn my ring around so you guys can get a better look. I'm going to grab both wires, but this time I'm making sure to grab the band of the wire that's coming straight out of my ring rather than the band that I'm about to coil. So I'm grabbing with that closest to my hand, and that's going to hold that a little bit tighter. So make sure you're grabbing it right at the base of that bend that we've just made. And then what I'm going to do is start my coil. Now, the tighter the better. This is kind of one of those tricky things where you have to make sure it's sized the right way. So I'm just going to manipulate it a little bit so that I'm matching the other one for my ring band, and then I'm good to go. So I'm going to pull it so that it's as close to a right angle bend as I can get it, and then I'm going to push the tail end of it through my ring band and then out to the other side. Now I'm going to go in with my other chain nose pliers, and I'm going to get it as tight as I can, and I'm just going to make those slight adjustments that we all make in order to get things where they need to go. So I'm coiling it around. I'm going to go in through the ring band again. I often like to put a little hook in it in order to get it through. And again, and kind of squish it like I did before to get a nice tight coil. And one more coil around. And pull real tight. Then what I'm going to do is go in with my flush cutters, trim the tail end off, and tuck it down. So I'm just using my chain nose pliers to tuck the tail end down and to tighten my coil. Notice how I've left this a little wide here. I'm going to wait to adjust that until I do the other side, because if the other one's wide, I'm just going to leave it. But I always wait to make my final adjustments until I've completed the same thing on the other side. So now what I do is I put this back on the ring, or on the ring mandrel. I check to make sure I'm at the size that I want, because at this point I could still slide this coil a little tighter or a little looser to make a tighter or a looser ring. So just make any adjustments that you need to, and then we're going to repeat those same steps on the other side. All right, so now that final adjustments have been made on the ring's size, what I'm going to do is prepare to coil this last piece of wire off to terminate it. So here's where it's really important to make sure that our doubled band on the back of the wire here is even and uniform. So let's say you coiled it a little bit too tight. It's just going to look uneven. You can adjust it after you've coiled it by just kind of scooting the coil back on the ring a little bit, but then you're going to have a wider gap on this side than on the other side. So taking the extra time here is really important to ensure that we have an appropriately placed bend and coil. So what I like to do is look at the ring from the underside, look at it from the top, and guesstimate exactly where I need to place that bend. That will give me enough space to match my coil numbers on the other side. So I'm going to go in with my chain nose pliers and make sure that my bands are uniform. And I'm going to start that bend. So I'm going to bend it towards the wire that is the original ring band. And I'm going to bend it really tight this time. So I'm going to, I could cut my wire down. I'm going to do that once I get it locked around since I'm already holding it. I'm going to go through the ring band, and then I'm going to bring my other pliers in and start to make those adjustments to make everything nice and tight. All right, so I've anchored on the size. I'm going to cut the length of the wire off that I don't need. So again, I'm cutting this wire about in half like I did on the other side. And now I'm going to hold it just like I did before, holding the ring band that's coming out of the ring itself. And I'm going to kind of curl my wire, bring it through the ring, and you can use your pliers if you don't have the hand strength to get uniform coils. And then I'm going to coil it until I have about 3 coils just to match the other side. And I'm going to trim the tail end off with my flush cutter, go in with my chain nose pliers to tighten it. And it looks like as I was wrapping, it slipped a little bit. So you can see my band that I just wrapped is a little bit bigger than the band that I did before. So all I'm going to do to fix that is just gently push those 2 coils together. If it's not wanting to budge, you can take your pliers and just kind of very carefully adjust it this way. And you can see how it's gently adjusting the ring band so that it matches the other side. The gaps are about the same size. I have this little wide band here that matches on both sides. That's okay. I would have liked it to be a little bit tighter, but since they match on both sides, I'm happy with it. And now here's where the magic comes in. What we're gonna do is put it back on our ring mandrel, make sure it's shaped okay. Then we're gonna take our polish pad back in, and we're just really gonna highlight the areas on the top of the ring. And as we get it nice and shiny, the areas that are inside the knot where the polish pad doesn't reach will look like they're kind of shadowed, and the areas at the top of the knot will look highlighted. And then you have this really beautiful, really high contrast effect to the knots that we've wrapped. If you enjoyed watching this video, please remember to give us a big thumbs up. It really helps the channel out. We put out new videos all the time. So subscribe if you'd like to see more. Please leave a comment down below if you have any questions or if you'd just like to say hi. I do my best to respond to all comments that I get notifications for anyway. And then if you'd like to support our channel even more, make sure to check out the Patreon link down below. There's a private Facebook group. There's lots of perks. Oh, Alex is telling me to point here. There's going to be a card right there. So there's lots of perks to becoming a Patreon member. There's quarterly giveaways, all kinds of fun stuff. And then remember, all the materials we're using today can be found linked down below. Thanks for watching.